word in English for both being simultaneously upset but also intrigued by the thing you're upset about? Because if there is, that's exactly how I feel about chapter 261 of JJK. Hi, I'm NC Hammer 23, live to you from Houston because I'm down here for Comic Palooza, and JJK just won't stop dropping generational chapter after generational chapter when I'm not home. Because while a week ago when chapter 260 of JJK came out, I knew chapter 261 was gonna be absolutely massive, I didn't know just how absolutely massive it was gonna be. There has been a lot of very divisive chapters released, especially recently in JJK. But I can't remember one more divisive than this. And it's probably a system of the fact that most of the JJK fandom, at least a specific subsection of the JJK fandom that's been yearning for it not to be Gojo over, had hope for the first time in a long time. And while they didn't get exactly what they wanted, they kind of did. However, a different subgenre of the JJK fandom, the Yuta fandom, kind of got kicked in the teeth. And thus, like ships passing in the night, one part of the fandom has something to celebrate, while the other has something to be very upset about. To elaborate specifically, we thought Gojo was going to be coming back in chapter 261 because of how chapter 260 ended. And in a way, he did. Though as to whether or not that's a way in which any Gojo fan wanted whatsoever, we'll have to wait and see. See, this chapter, while its reveal seems relatively straightforward, probably raises the most questions we've had in JJK maybe ever. And for an IP that seems to have dedicated itself to confusing and upsetting its fans, that's kind of impressive. Because while chapter 261 was incredibly flashback heavy, flashback that we were given in this chapter were really exposition heavy and also introduced new information we didn't know existed until this chapter. And all of this came from Yuta's last minute and last ditch effort to make sure that Gojo isn't the only person monsterizing themselves to defeat Sukuna, which has revealed to us, the adoring JJK fandom, that Yuta's Gojo now. And I wish I was kidding. And I wish I was kidding even more when I said that one of the biggest memes going around prior to the release of chapter 261 of JJK was that the Gojo that Sukuna saw at the end of chapter 260 was just Yuta holding up the top half of his corpse with a stick. And that was more accurate than anybody was even hoping for.
But Nick, the reveal that Yuta is now Gojo must be incredibly hyped. The fandom must be super stoked. Right?
Wrong. Well, people have definitely been more upset about things that have happened in this manga. I've never seen the fan base this divided. And for good reason, because even I am not entirely sure of how I feel, and I'm a very opinionated person. But in order to allow you to form your own opinions and then figure out how those opinions feel inside of your body, today I'm gonna try and give you all the facts, analysis, and theories that have spun out of chapter 261 of JJK. And then, after I've given you all of that information and allowed you to draw whatever conclusions you want, I'm gonna tell you how I feel. But before we get into explaining either this chapter or my feelings, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me breaking down your favorite anime and manga, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Taku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And if you want to see me live, this is your actual last opportunity because I'm already in Houston, and I'm at Comic Palooza, and I'll be here until Sunday. So if you want to pop down and talk to me about chapter 261 of JJK, now's the time. So, like I've already said, chapter 261 is very flashback heavy, but the flashbacks are wildly important. But chapter 261 does pick up where chapter 260 left off, specifically with Yuji with his big old meaty claws digging into Sukuna's chest. And now it's been revealed to us that Yuji has the resolution that he has to destroy Sukuna's heart. That is to say that Yuji believes the best course of action to end this fight quickly is to claw into Sukuna's chest, find his heart, and squeeze it. And that's exactly what Yuji is doing. He's screaming as he's clawing into Sukuna's chest, envisioning Chozo's face. But as Yuji is ripping away the flesh of Sukuna's chest, Sukuna says domain expansion. But as Sukuna chants domain expansion, just like how chapter 260 ends, Sukuna sees Gojo's body off in the distance. And Sukuna wonders if that could be reality, but he pushes that thought away because there's no way that Gojo could be alive. He cut him in half himself. But just as Sukuna is pushing this thought away, deeming it to be irresponsible and insane, the clouds clear, and Gojo is revealed. But Gojo looks different. Gojo has stitches across his forehead. And I'll tell you right now, for the panel and a half until it was revealed that this is actually Yuta and not Kenjaku, I was terrified, because the idea that Kenjaku would somehow get his hands on Gojo's body has been a thing we've talked about at length, though we deemed it was impossible because Kenjaku dies. It even goes on to say that somebody else will inherit my will, which we've now assumed to be Sukuna. But people have gone even further than that in saying that Kenjaku was able to take over Takaba's body because Takaba died very conveniently with a head wrap on that would cover the scars. But fortunately, as soon as Gojo with scars is revealed, it's also revealed that it's not Kenjaku. Because Sukuna, who still has Yuji tearing apart his chest meat, says, "I didn't think you would go this far, Yuta Okotsu." And in this moment, he punches away Yuji, now facing down Gota? And seemingly moving on from Yuji as his opponent because he's honoring how far Yuta went in order to come back as Gojo. So yeah, Gojo is alive in the same sense that Geto was alive when he was Kenjaku. And that is to say that the memories, abilities, and body of Gojo are alive, but his soul may or may not still be there. There's actually people in the It's Not Gojover camp who believe that Kenjaku being choked by Geto in the Shibuya incident was actually foreshadowing to not Geto breaking back out, but Gojo. As there is a legitimate theory out there that I've already been texted by my friend Big Mike, the actual king of Copium, who believes that eventually Yuta's soul will die and Gojo's will take back over, which will bring Gojo back to life, now with just new forehead accessories. But we'll get to that later. After it's revealed that this new version of Gojo is Yuta, that's when the flashbacks begin, and they stick around for a while. The flashbacks start with Yuta explaining to the Kusakabe Coalition that he's gonna have Rika devour Kenjaku's corpse. And by Rika devouring Kenjaku's corpse, he will be able to copy Kenjaku's curse technique, the brain-body switching technique. Now this brings up more interesting points than just the idea that Yuta now has the ability to switch bodies. This is the first time it's ever confirmed on how Yuta is able to copy other people's techniques. See, while it's been theorized that for as long as Yuta's been a character that his copy ability was somehow tied to Rika, this is the actual only confirmed method we know that allows Yuta to copy techniques. Now this probably isn't the only way that Yuta can copy techniques because he has cursed speech and he didn't eat Inumaki, which is why people believe that Rika also has a reactionary replication ability that allows for her to copy the techniques that Yuta has been hit by in order to protect him. And while it's definitely been hinted at, either Rika or Yuta consuming somebody allows for him to copy their technique, as he was able to copy Uro's techniques after Rika ate their arm, and was able to copy Sukuna's techniques after he ate one of Sukuna's fingers. But this is the first actual confirmation. Now Maki, not wanting to see her husband switch out of his sweet, smoking hot body, possibly not wanting her friend to engage in incredibly dangerous activity, objects to this plan. But Hikari states that it's allowed only under one condition, and that condition is it's only to be used in a last case scenario, when everybody is wiped out and there's no other options. Now Kusakabe chips in and says, can't you just copy the Limitless technique? To which Shoko says, you can't use the Limitless technique unless you have the 6 eyes. To which Kusakabe responds by saying, well then why don't you just copy the 6 eyes as well? To which Shoko responds by saying that they're a part of his physical body and therefore cannot be copied. Something that we've been theorizing about for a pretty long time now. Basically, ever since Gojo died. This is why the theory I posted a couple of weeks ago said that Yuji was going to eat part of Gojo's body and then do a switch with Yuta so Yuta could use these newly granted abilities. And while I wasn't spot on, I was surprisingly close, and you have to give me that. I'm sorry, how many other people were anticipating Yuta using Gojo's abilities? Sure, did I not nail the vessel? No. But did I nail exactly what was going to happen in the manga? Yes! And you all called me crazy, said,
oh, this sounds like it's coming from a weird fanfiction. Who would have this idea?
Me, this sick brain would have this idea, and I'm tapped into Gege. Now, to interrupt my self-congratulatory circle, Maki chimes in and says, Yuta, you can only use your copy curse technique for 5 minutes, so what's gonna happen after those 5 minutes? Are you just gonna die inside of Gojo's body? Is your consciousness gonna fade? Is your soul gonna snap back to your body? To which Yuta says, I don't know. But fortunately, the touchy one, Mei is there to explain the pros and cons of Yuta switching with Gojo's body. And she breaks it down with 3 scenarios. The first scenario results in Yuta's death, and that death would come if Kenjaku's curse technique was of the constant activation or the intermediate activation type. That is to say, in simpler terms, essentially, if Kenjaku needed to put either constant or intermediate amounts of effort into maintaining a vessel like Kenjaku's body, then after 5 minutes, Yuta would die because he wouldn't be able to maintain the body or the soul. Now this would make sense because after 5 minutes, Yuta won't be able to use the copy and curse technique and therefore won't be able to use Kenjaku's brain swap ability. And if it requires a level of continual output that you can't do after 5 minutes, night night Yuta. Now the second scenario is kind of the same as the first one. It's Mei saying that if the curse technique requires intermittent updates like every 10 minutes or every hour, that Yuta won't die immediately, but he'll die eventually. The second he can't check into this new body, see you later. Now the third scenario is the best scenario, at least for the Kusakabe Coalition, so you can almost guarantee it's not gonna happen. And this third scenario states that Kenjaku's mind-swapping technique is a single-use technique. That's to say that whenever Kenjaku pops his brain into a new body, he gets that brain forever. And if that's the scenario, then Yuta would be able to use the Limitless long beyond 5 minutes. He would essentially just become Gojo forever. And if that's the scenario, after Yuta has switched into Gojo's body, there's a possibility that while switching into Gojo's body, his old curse techniques will be discarded and Yuta will have to live as Gojo forever. Now, out of all the possibilities, I believe that one is the least likely because let's remember exactly what Kenjaku's curse technique allowed him to do. Kenjaku was able to switch from body to body and he was able to stockpile all of the abilities, memories, and curse techniques of these previous hosts. And while they didn't hold on to all of them because it would be too much information for a 1,000-year-old brain, they held on to the important curse techniques. And this is why Kenjaku, in Geto's body, was still able to use the curse technique of Yuji's mother. Yuta then tells the Kusakabe Coalition that this is a last case scenario and that he'll attempt to battle against Sukuna in his own domain, and if he doesn't lose, he'll accept Gojo's body. Kusakabe then tells Yuta that it's a good plan, but it's just not humane, which infuriates Yuta as he asks Kusakabe, what do you mean it's not humane? We're battling against history's strongest sorcerer. Humanity is not something we should be worrying about. We should be pulling all the stops out possible in order to be as strong as possible to defeat this menace. Yuta then asks if the Kusakabe Coalition is worried about him becoming a monster to defeat Sukuna, to which Maki responds by saying, we're just concerned about you. Now this makes Yuta even more mad as he looks at the Kusakabe Coalition and says, well then what about Gojo? We're allowing for Gojo to become a monster in this upcoming battle against Sukuna. We're lofting all of our hopes and dreams onto his shoulders and expecting him to carry us to the promised ground. Why can't we expect the same from ourselves? And what happens if Gojo is gone and we all placed our hopes and dreams on him? What happens then if nobody else is monsterized? Who is left to defeat Sukuna? And if none of you are willing to chance it at becoming a monster to save Gojo, then I'll do it myself. The scene then switches from Yuta yelling at the Kusakabe Coalition to Yuta having a conversation with Gojo, where Yuta is having a rather complicated and I can only imagine exceedingly rare conversation with Gojo where he's saying, if you die, I'm gonna take your body. To which Gojo says that he's fine with that because 1, he's not gonna lose to Sukuna. Apparently he's a liar. And 2, he wouldn't care what would happen to his body after he died, even if he didn't win against Sukuna. It's at this point that Gojo and Yuta have a completely throwaway and somewhat useless conversation about their descendancy, where Yuta tells Gojo that he's a descendant of Fujiwara blood. But then he asks Gojo because Gojo told him he was a descendant of Sugawara blood. At which point Gojo says it is Sugawara blood. You and I are distant relatives, but didn't the Sugawara and Fujiwara have bad blood between them? At which point Yuta says, oh, well, I guess Uro was incorrect. For those of you who don't remember what Yuta is talking about here, Uro is the woman who had the ability to pull the sky. She was a Jujutsu sorcerer from 1,000 years ago, and she was the captain of, I believe, the Sun, the Star, and the Moon squads. AKA she was in charge of a lot of the teams that came together in order to battle back against Sukuna. Now the Sun, Moon, and Star squad was an assassin squad affiliated with the Fujiwara Fujiwara family. And thus she told Yuta that he was descendant from Fujiwara blood, but it was actually Sugawara blood, at least that's what Gojo said to it. But while the Fujiwara and Sugawara families did technically have bad blood between them, they were two incredibly powerful families. So Gojo says, well, maybe both me and Uro are correct, and you're descended from not only the Sugawara, but also the Fujiwara. And because now the direction of this conversation has revealed that Yuta is a descendant of two legendary sorcerer families, Gojo tells Yuta that he might have been born under more favorable circumstances than even Gojo, and therefore if he doesn't live up to his potential, he'd be super lame. And thus at this point of the conversation, Gojo just switches to bad-mouthing Yuta, telling him his cursed energy usage is sloppy and that he's always wanted him to be better at it. It's at this point that it's revealed that Gojo and Yuta aren't walking alone. There's also Panda, Maki, and Inomaki, all of whom Gojo tells to go away. And why, you ask? Well, because if you remember from like 40 chapters ago, after Gojo was released from the prison realm, the first thing that he did was kill all of the Jujutsu Society's elders. And thus he tells his students to go away because he doesn't want them to see the bloody side of, well, I guess who he is. He also doesn't want them around because he's not entirely sure what he's about to do is correct, morally or even for the Jujutsu Society. He then tells his students that if he loosed the Sukuna and all of the old people that I'm about to murder are gone, Sakuganji, also known as the Kyoto Principal, whose curse technique is shredding the electric guitar, will be the one left to stand on top of the Jujutsu world, and thus there'll be no more chaos like there was post the Shibuya incident. That is to say that the elders of the Jujutsu Society won't put a hit out on Yuji and kill the principal of Tokyo's Jujutsu High. Because as we all know, Gojo has always hated the elders, or really just anybody who existed above him in terms of status. And therefore, once again, Gojo tells his students to step back. But Yuta refutes him, saying, Gojo, don't try to turn yourself into a monster by yourself. In essence, what Yuta is saying here is that Gojo is taking too much of the burden of fixing the entire world onto himself, and therefore he should lean on his students more. It's at this point that Gojo says that he has to, because at that moment, and at that moment is when Gojo and Geto have their very famous breakup on the sidewalk, that Gojo was left behind, and therefore Gojo has to catch up to Geto. Now this is essentially Gojo treating Geto and his decision to try and wipe out all of humanity with a fair bit of reverence. He's respecting the decision that Geto made and the choice he made in order to make himself into a monster to achieve what he believed was the best possible version of the future, and is in essence saying, I have to follow in those footsteps in order to achieve what I truly want, the best version of the future. And ironically, both Gojo and Geto have now both ended up piloted by somebody else. And there's a lesson in there, maybe. Maybe the idea that throwing away your morals will lead to your impending doom and somebody else picking up the pieces of what you were trying to accomplish. It is, after all, exactly what happened with both Geto and Kenjaku, and now Gojo and Yuta. We then cut away from the important characters to talk about side characters we haven't thought about in 100 chapters. More specifically, Amai. See, Amai is Hyuji's friend. Do you guys remember him? Of course not. Why would you? So much has happened. Blonde, he's got a yarmulke. I don't think he's actually Jewish, but he's got a yarmulke. And he's explaining to Shoko that his curse technique is, and I'm not making this up, the ability to amplify how much sugar in his body and output it in a way. And the way that he does this is he takes a plate and then he makes a flan, and some people got the limitless in the 6 eyes. Shoko then says, wow, what an amazing ability. I'm gonna put you on the support team with Nita so you can give people's brains sugar in the operation room if that's necessary. We then cut to Amai in the operation room staring at a bisected Yuta. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Yuta got cut in half. Now, do we love that? No, we don't, because it doesn't make sense. Sorry, I'm supposed to be giving you the facts, and then I have to give you my opinion first. For those of you who don't remember the breaking of Yuta's domain, when a full-powered Jacob's Ladder crashes down on Sukuna, and Sukuna is punched by Yuji so hard that Yuji is able to reach out to Megami's soul, when Megami is like, nah, I don't want to get out of bed quite yet to Yuji, the first thing that Sukuna does is he does his chant for his world-cutting cleave, which happens to hit Yuta. Now, just prior to this moment, it was established that every single time that Yuji came into contact with Sukuna, be that a punch or a black flash, he was weakening Sukuna's control as a vessel. And thus every single time Sukuna was hit by Yuji, he should have been getting weaker. In fact, that's been stated multiple times. And yet Sukuna, with just a single chant from point blank distance, was able to cut Yuta, somebody with some of the highest durability in this entire universe, in half. Now, this scene when it was revealed was incredibly sloppily drawn, so you couldn't really see what happened to Yuta, but you could see that blood popped out of the back of him when he was sliced. So the idea that he was cut in half wasn't crazy, especially when you consider Rika's, let's call it a reaction. But should Sukuna, in that moment, when technically he should have been the weakest he's ever been, because that's the only time Yuji has ever been able to break through to Megami's soul, had enough power to cut Yuta in half? I would say no. What would you say? Because while sure, you can make the argument that Megami deciding to not come out and play when Yuji came into contact with him possibly re-strengthened Sukuna's control over Megami as a vessel and gave him his attack power back, but that's thin and hasn't been corroborated by literally anything. But yeah, Yuta got cut in half, and he was rushed to the medical ward after being cut in half by Ui. Now, fortunately, at the medical ward also is Arata, Toto's actual brother, who's able to stop things, though those things usually end up being wounds. It's what Arata did to Nobura's corpse in order to make sure that she didn't get any deader than she already was after Mahito gave her a little face slap. Now, this was ensuring that Yuta's wounds weren't going to get any worse, but they were already, like, really bad. He had a bad case of being in two. Now, Yuta says to Shoko that he's still conscious because of Rika, but he's starting to reach his limit. But Shoko, apparently forever either the pessimist or just the prepared one, tells Yuta that she's already stitched up Gojo's corpse. So when Yuta does finish the brain transfer over to Gojo's corpse, he has to activate reverse curse technique at maximum capacity immediately. And in that moment, he'll complete the body. We then smash back to the present where Sukuna and Gojo are starting another clash of domains. And would you look at that, they're both using the same hand sign. The narrator then tells us that Gojo has already shown us how to defeat Sukuna's open barrier domain expansion. Because if you guys will remember, at the beginning of the Sukuna and Gojo battle, there was 4 back-to-back domain clashes that eventually led to Gojo figuring out how to attack Sukuna's domain in a way that breaks it down and allowed for Gojo's domain, Infinite Void, to hit Sukuna for even a couple of seconds that allowed for him to be dazed and have damage done to his brain. And thus, because of how Kenjaku's body switching ability works, Yuta, who is now Gojo and therefore has all of his abilities and memories, should know exactly how to break down Sukuna's domain expansion. And thus the chapter ends with Sukuna's malevolent shrine and Gojo's unlimited void clashing. And I hate it. I hate it so much. There's not, like, I struggle to find a good part of it, but at the same time, it's exciting. That's confusing and not well explained. Let me walk you through my feelings and allow you to step into my brain for a second. I think we can all agree that if Gojo had walked into this battle against Sukuna and won, that would have been kind of weird. Like, sure, of course, Gojo is one of the main characters of JJK, and many people like him more than they like Yuji, but he's not the main character of the story. And you know who else isn't the main character of the story, though he was supposed to be, and he was the main character of Chapter 0, Yuta. And both of them were out of the story. And while I did theorize that Yuta was going to use the second switch on switching into Yuji's body and allowing his body to adapt to the Limitless and the Six Eyes, and this would technically entail Yuji switching into Yuta's body, and the two of them could have jumped Sukuna together, which would have been really cool, and it would have been the two MCs of this story, the supposed to be MC and the actual MC, finishing off the big baddie in a way that works with in-universe powers. And while what's technically happening right now is kind of that, Yuta and Yuji are gonna launch a battle against Sukuna, and it is through the medium of in-universe abilities like Kenjaku's body swapping ability, Gojo returning and then immediately entering into a domain clash with Sukuna is just resetting like 40 chapters of this fight. Like, this is how the fight starts. And if this is how the fight ends, I guess it's a cool full circle moment, but it takes the win away from Yuji. See, the last 2 chapters, we had an actual really cool full circle moment already happen. Todo breaking onto the scene to help his brother in his lowest moment. It happened against the plant spirit whose name I'm forgetting, Hanami, and Mahito. And while sure, technically Yuji can still absolutely be involved in this battle, this is Yuta controlling Gojo's body. How is Yuji gonna fit into a level of battle this high? I mean, the literal reason Yuji didn't jump in when Gojo was battling against Sukuna is because he and every other person in the Kusakabe coalition would only get in the way. Also, follow-up question, how is Sukuna still in this battle? Sukuna had to make 2 binding vows to use the domain expansion he used the last time he used it. And you're telling me that Sukuna is about to enter into a battle of domains with Gojo's body being piloted by Yuta. It just doesn't narratively make sense. Gege had an out, and that out was Yuji and Todo doing the thing they've already done twice. It was beautiful. Sukuna was overwhelmed. Yuji was tearing into his chest. You know, all you have to do to finish this story is have those 2 finish Sukuna. That would be cool. And yet we revive Gojo, kind of, and kill Yuta, kind of, so that Yuta can possibly have 5 minutes to battle against Sukuna? Like, what does that do for anything except extend the story? Because here's the thing, ask yourself honestly, if this version of Gojo kills Sukuna, would you be happy with that? I mean, if the answer is yes, then awesome, great for you. The story's heading in a direction you like, but I want Yuji, the main character who's finally getting the exposition and the love he deserves to finish this story. And while he probably will, because Gege's not an idiot and he knows that if this version of Gojo defeats Sukuna, a lot of people are gonna be upset, then why bring Gojo and Yuta back into the equation? Once again, you're just extending the story. Not to mention the reason that JJK was the #1 trending IP on Earth last week is because Gojo might return. And while Gojo straight up just returning after making a binding vow to heal up his wounds would have brought about the same issues that Yuta piloting his body did, of all the ways to bring Gojo back, I can't imagine one less satisfactory than this one. Like, hey, it's Gojo's body. But it's Yuta's soul. It's non-ironically killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Now all this is assuming that I'm not correct and that Big Mike might be and that Yuta's soul might perish inside of Gojo's body, but Gojo's body, like Geto's, is able to snap back and rally against this mind-switching technique and come back to life and mop the floor with Sukuna. But the closest thing comparatively to what this feels like for me is the Stars and Stripe fight in MHA, when all of the exposition has been set up for the final baddies to fight the final goodies. Some crazily powerful MC-type character gets thrown in to battle against a banged-up version of the final baddie, and then they lose. And then everyone's like, well, that sucked. Go get him, Yuji/Deku. And maybe I'm just saying that because MHA literally just ended its run exactly how I believed JJK was gonna end its run. Maybe the only real reason that Gojo and Yuta decided to re-enter the story is because Gege didn't want to actually be accused of ripping off Horikoshi, which he obviously wasn't, but if you've read the ending of MHA and you're up to date with JJK, you can acknowledge the fact the stories are very similar now. So overall, how do I feel about this? I mean, I think we can all acknowledge the fact that it's cool. Yuta's switched bodies with Gojo. He's piloting Gojo's body using the 6 eyes, the limitless, unlimited void. He's got all of Gojo's abilities, possibly his old abilities, possibly his old domain expansion. We're getting a bigger look into Rika's abilities and Kenjaku's abilities. And Yuta might only have 5 minutes to battle against Sukuna, which means there's now a timeline in order for Yuji to finish the battle against Sukuna, but it just feels like it distracts from the point. And the point is Yuji. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think, because I'm conflicted and maybe some of you aren't. So how did you guys feel about chapter 261? Tell me in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now me and Danny are going to get barbecue, and